When the Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks of the Bardo, it is not merely describing what happens after biological death. It is describing what happens whenever a self collapses. In Western psychology, we might call it ego disintegration, identity fracture, or existential destabilization. But the Tibetan text, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, uses a more poetic language. It tells us that between one identity and the next, there is a dangerous, luminous, unstable interval. And that interval is not reserved for monks or mystics. It happens in hospitals. It happens after surgery. It happens after the doctor says it was close. Let us consider a difficult but psychologically revealing case. Imagine a woman who cut off her in-laws for years. No calls. No visits, no acknowledgment of their existence. The separation was not casual. It was ideological, structural, identity-based. Her inner narrative may have sounded like this: I am strong. I chose independence, and I was right. That narrative was not merely opinion. It was scaffolding. It held up her psychological architecture. But then comes a cardiac episode, a malignant diagnosis, a sudden collapse, and something far more profound than the body fails. The identity, I am invulnerable, dies. This is the first movement of Bardo, the death of the former self. In clinical language, the adaptive defensive structure ceases to function. The belief I need no one no longer regulates anxiety. The body has betrayed the ideology. At night, she may now think, I didn't know I was this fragile. What if it happens again? What if I'm alone? The strong self no longer operates. The ego that was built on severance has disintegrated. This is not repentance. It is structural collapse. Now we enter the second movement, the intermediate state. She is no longer the person who cut them off, but she is not yet a new person either. Western developmental theorists describe such periods as liminality, a suspended identity phase. The Tibetans call it Bardo. In this space, decisions are not made from wisdom. They are made from anxiety regulation. She may think, should I reconnect? Would that make me weak? But what if I need them? This is not reconciliation. This is ambiguity. When the old narrative dies, the mind cannot tolerate emptiness for long. It reaches for stabilization. And here we reach the third movement, the most psychologically volatile one. Fear and dependency surge simultaneously. Most people assume fear makes us withdraw, and loneliness makes us seek others. But in certain personality structures, both impulses intensify at the same time. Two internal voices coexist. I never want to be hurt again. I can't survive this alone. The result is oscillation. She may visit and say lightly, it's just a quick hello. But internally, another calculation operates. If something happens again, I may need them. Family might matter after all. The approach is tentative, reversible, provisional. From the outside, observers, especially the in-laws, may interpret this as growth. She changed. The illness softened her. She faced death and realized what matters. That interpretation is emotionally understandable, but psychologically it is often inaccurate. The Tibetan text contains a striking warning. In the Bardo, luminous visions may appear peaceful and redemptive, yet they may be projections of fear seeking comfort. In modern terms, anxiety can masquerade as enlightenment. The softened tone, the gentle language, the suggestion of reconnection, these may not signal moral transformation. They may signal existential threat response. Let us be precise. After major illness or life-threatening surgery, three conditions often coexist. The body begins to recover. The emotions remain unstable. The future feels uncertain. This combination produces existential insecurity. The mind then activates what I call the survival algorithm. It seeks the most stable past structure, the most morally difficult to reject relationship, the most controllable relational access point. In many marital systems, in-laws fit all three criteria. They are structurally family. They can be accessed through the spouse. They are socially constrained from outright rejection. Thus, the sudden visit is not necessarily reconciliation. It is resource recalibration. Not love, but insurance. Not awakening, but stabilization. From the perspective of the Bardo, attachment has not disappeared. It has shifted its object. Previously, she was attached to severance. I am the one who does not depend. Now she may be attached to safety. I must not be left unsupported. The underlying structure control through relational positioning remains intact. So the crucial question becomes, has there been structural transformation? In authentic psychological change, at least several markers appear. Direct acknowledgment of past rupture. Specific responsibility-taking language. No self-justifying explanations. Willingness to move at the other party's pace. Acceptance of possible rejection. Without these elements, the approach is likely provisional. Now we must also consider the psychology of the in-laws and the spouse. They have endured distance, confusion, and perhaps humiliation. When a hand is extended even slightly, their nervous systems surge with hope. Maybe this is the turning point. Maybe crisis matured her. Maybe this is redemption. But hope can create narrative before evidence. The Bardo teaches that beings grasp at familiar forms when fear intensifies. The in-laws grasp at reconciliation. She grasps at security. Both are grasping. Neither may be grounded in transformation. So, should they accept the visit? This is the painful, practical question. If acceptance is unconditional, if no structure, accountability, or pacing is established, the probability of reseverance is high. Why? Because once her acute anxiety decreases, her body stabilizes, she feels control restored, and no relational cost was required. The original identity structure can reassert itself, and the cycle restarts. In clinical observation, repeated rupture occurs not because people lack emotion, but because structures were never altered. The Bardo ends not when fear subsides, but when a new identity forms. Until then, behavior is provisional. So what appears as moral awakening may instead be a temporary strategy to survive existential instability. The lesson is not cynicism, it is clarity. When someone returns after years of severance, following a life-threatening crisis, ask not. Did she become kinder? Ask instead, what died and what has not yet been born? Between death and rebirth lies the Bardo, and in that space, human beings reach not for truth, but for safety. Preserve the right to stop. This is perhaps the most important principle. Parents-in-law must internally reclaim the option. We can pause this relationship if it becomes harmful again. Without that internal permission, they may fall into the psychological trap of endurance. We accepted her back, so now we must tolerate anything. Instead, clarity must be voiced. If this becomes painful again, we will step back. We are willing to try, but not at any cost. This is not threat. It is sovereignty. The deeper philosophical frame. If we step back, we see that this situation is not sentimental. It is structural. The return after crisis was not random. It followed a predictable psychological algorithm. Existential threat, attachment, activation, resource, recalibration. If unconditional acceptance meets that algorithm, a second sequence often follows. Anxiety reduction, control, restoration, gradual withdrawal. The Tibetan text offers a stark warning. In the intermediate state, if one follows attachment, one returns again to the same realm of suffering. The apparent reconciliation may not be awakening. It may be attachment changing objects. Previously, attachment was to severance. Now, it may be attachment to security, but attachment itself remains unexamined. If parents-in-law respond only with emotional relief, finally, we are whole again. They may unknowingly participate in restarting the cycle. The question, therefore, is not whether to open the door. The question is whether opening the door will be governed by wisdom or by longing. Because longing alone, however understandable, does not transform structure. Only boundaries do. And in every Bardo, whether after death, illness, or relational collapse, the decisive factor is not who reaches first. It is who remains conscious while reaching. If that consciousness is absent, the wheel turns again.